Now, no one wins from a big spending government in an inflation crisis. At best, the budget fails to address inflation. At worst, it adds fuel to the fire. There is a credible case that it is actually making things worse. Rich Insights Director Chris Richardson said he, and I quote, had thought that the Reserve Bank was done and dusted, but this has notably raised the chance they will do another swing of the baseball bat. S&P Global Ratings disputed the government's forecast, stating we expect inflation to be stubbornly higher than the Reserve Bank's target until fiscal 2026, and that handouts in today's budget may add to inflationary pressures. And BetaShares Chief Economist David Bassis calls the budget unambiguously expansionary. Now, it's concerning to see the Treasurer, who spent more time spinning budgets than studying them, dismissing the views of economists so easily. Meanwhile, the government seems to have spent the last week trying to work out who this budget is supposed to help, rather than being focused on who it was supposed to help from the start. Middle Australia was not spoken of in the lead up to the budget or in the Treasurer's budget speech. And yet, in the post-budget wash-up, the Treasurer mentioned Middle Australia 41 times. The Prime Minister, 15 times in his media appearances and counting. I'm sure we'll hear many more. Labor can try to spin its way out of a budget failure, but it won't change the fact that there is no light at the end of the tunnel for hard-working Australians who are trying to get ahead. Given the strength of commodity prices, the jobs market, the trend of monthly surpluses I've described coming out of the pandemic, it's been clear that a drover's dog could have delivered a surplus this year. It's essential the government do the same next year, and it's also within reach to deliver ongoing budget balance. This is the true test for Labor. It's not easy, but it can be done, and we know this because we did it. Prior to the pandemic, the Coalition in 2019 balanced the budget, and then we did this while increasing spending on essential services, growing defence spending to over 2% of GDP, and supporting the creation of more than 1 million jobs and 250,000 businesses. And the key to it was we got the economy to grow faster than our spending. Now, the path to fiscal consolidation is not to tax Australians more. Labor's fiscal strategy sets no cap on tax growth and contains no commitment to private sector-led growth. This is the wrong strategy. Higher taxes stifle investment, innovation and aspiration. As economist Alberto Alesina has shown us, tax-driven fiscal improvements damage growth compared with containment of spending growth. Simply put, you cannot tax your way into economic prosperity, just as you can't spend your way out of high inflation. Australians struggling with the cost of living will see taxes rise on top of ever-increasing prices. But worse, some of these taxes are bound to be passed right onto consumers' bills. The truckies tax adding to the cost of food and freight. $153 million tax on our farmers. Labor's franking credits and super taxes will be directly felt by self-funded retirees and pensioners alike. And bracket creep, the tax you don't notice until you look at the impact on your bank account, is eating away at Australians' earning power. The budget papers show income tax as a percent of GDP growing over the forwards. And over the next 5 years, the tax paid by Australians will increase by more than $300 billion. $300 billion. Now, this budget has abandoned tax incentives that support innovation, investment and productivity that grow the economy. The patent box regime has been abandoned. The technology investment boost has not been extended. And whilst we welcome the retention of the instant asset write-off, the government has decimated its asset value cap and removed access to the investment allowance for medium-sized businesses. Labor's big spending, high taxing, high regulation agenda risks putting us into a period of stagflation. Inflation and low economic growth are a very dangerous combination, a very dangerous cocktail. And it's why the government's committed to, or the coalition is committed to, restoring the same fiscal rules that delivered lower taxes and a balanced budget in 2019. It's why the coalition is committed to restoring the tax to GDP cap. It's why we're committed to delivering the stage 3 tax cuts. And it's why we continue to fight Labor's broken promises on taxes to superannuation and franking credits. Now, strong economic growth over the short term and into the longer term is essential to boosting quality of life. And at a time where inflation is making quality of life, standard of living worse, productivity gains are the only pathway to ensure Australians can realise their aspirations over the medium to long term, making it easier to do a job or run a business, making it easier for customers to get a better deal or engage with government services. The McKinsey Global Institute has highlighted that productivity reform is essential to solving the challenges confronting most advanced economies, ranging from labour market shortages, debt, inflation and energy challenges. The Reserve Bank minutes from April have sounded the alarm bell on productivity, but the government isn't listening. The government talks a lot about productivity to justify billions of dollars of extra expenditure, yet its own budget shows a deteriorating productivity position despite the spending. The Productivity Commission's 5-year review has all but been buried, with not a single measure in budget paper number 2, a direct response to the recommendations made, not a single measure responding to those recommendations. Worse, the budget throws up challenges to productivity and economic growth, particularly when it comes to people and energy. Now, the budget has the Australian population growing by substantially more than Adelaide over the next 5 years, but with no plan to address housing supply, infrastructure needs and other services required to make that growth successful. We all support a well-planned migration program, and that's the history of coalition governments. But over 5 years, net overseas migration will see our population increase by over 1.5 million people. It's the biggest migration surge in our country's history, and it's occurring amidst a housing and rental crisis. Migration is an enormous part of our history and has been critical to our economic success, our culture, our lifestyles and who we are. I saw the enormous power of aspirational migrants as a kid growing up near Cooma, south of here, one of the proudest migrant communities in Australia. More than 100,000 people from over 30 countries travelled to the Snowies after the Second World War for work on the Snowy scheme. So whilst migration will continue to serve us well into the future, it only works if you have a complementary plan around the infrastructure, the housing and the services that are required. Instead, the government is cutting infrastructure spending in real terms and reallocating it to their pet projects. Now, if you talk to any business, big or small, around Australia right now, they'll tell you that one of their biggest supply constraints remains labour shortages. We have record job vacancies of over 435,000 people. Alongside managed migration, there is an opportunity to give more Australians the incentive to get into work or increase the hours of work they're doing. A high proportion of the 550,000 unemployed Australians are capable of working more than 30 hours a week. And there is nothing like a job to improve somebody's life. Australians on JobSeeker face effective marginal tax rates of up to 60 cents in the dollar. This is a huge disincentive to work at a time when the economy and job seekers can't afford it. It's why Peter Dutton announced our proposal to increase the amount a job seeker could earn before their payment is affected. This is a common sense policy that could boost the income of someone on JobSeeker that works not by $40 a fortnight, but by up to $300. It's similar to the pension work bonus we championed, and the government ended up implementing a version of it at least, not the full version, but a version last year. We've suggested this is a bipartisan, constructive way because we think this is ultimately better for those on JobSeeker, but also for the country, because it will help to put downward pressure on inflation. Another major barrier to growth is energy prices going in the wrong direction, alongside Labor's attacks on the gas sector, a sector we need to support lower emissions and lower energy prices. Between the gas caps, the PRRT, the safeguard mechanism, delayed approvals and the abandoning of carbon capture and storage incentives, one of our largest export industries is under attack from the government. It's a death by 1,000 cuts to an industry that has powered our nation and our economy for so many years. It is one of Australia's great success stories, and just as Australia needs it to be successful, so too do so many of our customer countries throughout Asia. Meanwhile, most hard-working Australians will not benefit a cent from the government's cost of living relief, despite power bills, because of power bills increasing by more than $500 for a typical household. A more prosperous Australia demands a sharp focus on a low inflation and high growth economy. And in Peter Dutton's budget reply, he made several down payments on an agenda that will promote growth in the medium term, supporting gas as a medium-term energy source and removing barriers to nuclear energy, restoring mental health sessions to Medicare so Australians can be healthier at a time of crisis that we're seeing for so many, committing to a tax to GDP cap that will incentivise productivity in government, and repealing Labor's super tax. The starting point for real action on growth and productivity is to take action to support businesses to lower costs and keep strong employment right across our economy. Now, $1 today is worth less than it was a year ago. $1 today is worth less than it was a year ago. And this government's policies risk inflation and interest rates that are higher for longer, prolonging the pain. Australians trying to get ahead will be the ones who pay the biggest price. The Coalition has been clear that we would not have delivered this budget. Our priority would be to bring down inflation and set up Australia for growth in the medium term through lower taxes and growth-enhancing policies. This would take pressure off prices and prevent a generation of Australians becoming the working poor. It would support the Reserve Bank by having a fiscal policy pulling in the same direction as monetary policy, and it would set up Australians for the future they deserve. Thank you very much.